Very good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good whatever it is, wherever you are on this beautiful globe that we all occupy. Welcome to the Hereticals podcast or HereticalsCast, or I don't know. It's only episode 3, so I'm still trying to work out exactly what it's called. I get confused sometimes. But anyway, welcome wherever you are listening to us or watching us. Thank you for being a part. Today, I've got a pretty cool guest, someone who I've had a lot of online interaction with, a lot of fun, someone who's given me some good tips on Irish whiskey. John Hamill, welcome to the podcast.
It's wonderful to talk with you, Chris. I hope you're well. You don't mind if I enjoy an adult beverage while we're chatting, I hope?
Mate, the only problem I have with it is it's 10 o'clock in the morning here, and I can't join you for one. Because let me tell you, it has been something I have had on my bucket list to do, to have a whiskey or two with you.
We'll get that ticked off one of these days.
Definitely, mate.
Although, I'm jealous of your weather. If it's a more relaxing time of the day for me, it sounds like more relaxing weather where you are.
Yeah. I'm not going to lie. I'm looking out a window at green trees and blue skies at the moment, so it's
superb.
It's not too bad. Although we are getting close to winter, and where I live in Australia is probably where you don't want to be for winter because it's just miserable. But we sort of have those 4 or 5 months, and then the sun comes out. We get that 1 month where it's just like disgustingly hot, and then the rest of the year is pretty good. But so I'll ask the important question: What are you drinking? What's the drink of choice?
Something called Samuel Gelston's single pot still Irish whiskey. I like it a lot.
Okay. Now, I know that you've put me onto a few good ones, so it's they all went very quick. I can't remember
it's easy to do.
the brand, but there was I think it was a masala cask that I tried.
Yes, that sounds like there's a whiskey called the Whistler that does marsala casks.
I think that was it.
There you go. That one's quite close to me, actually. I drive past that distillery reasonably regularly. The guy who owns it is just whistles all day. That's the only reason why they use that name for the whiskey, which is a bit cheap maybe, but there you go.
Oh well, they all have to get their name somehow. Now I remember I got that one. And I thought I'll have a glass. I'll just see what it's like, and wasn't planning on having any more than just sort of one at the time, and liked it so much. I think the bottle lasted a few days. So I've been afraid to go back and rebuy it.
I've been there.
Unfortunately, it happens. I've been told Randy in the chat's telling me that day drinking is all right. It probably is. I've just got to pick up kids in a few hours, so it's I reckon showing up to the school after a few whiskeys. But anyway, you have one for me. You have one for me.
I'll do my
so
best.
A couple of things that I want to talk about, because originally, I got you on to talk about the wonderful and very democratic organisation known as AAI. Where there's absolutely nothing dodgy going on at all, and you're just on a vicious smear campaign against the good folks there. We were going to talk about that. For those who can't see, there's a lot of sarcasm coming through here, obviously. But you've had a bit of an interesting event that sort of, I guess it's been ongoing for you, but it hit the newspapers the other day, where you had applied for a position as an army chaplain, as a humanist. Mate, do you want to give us what's happened there? Give us the story.
So firstly, you're exactly right, Chris. It's one of those things that's been ongoing for me for a very long time. But the legal decision just came out recently. So the hearing was almost exactly a year ago, the legal hearing. And before that, I had been writing to the minister. I believe I'm writing for 3 years, roughly every 2 months for 3 years, trying to get this position. And eventually I just had to litigate. So there's a Defence Forces regulation in Ireland that says the chaplains are appointed by bishops. So at the minute we have 15 Roman Catholic chaplains in our Defence Forces, and 1 Church of Ireland is a Protestant denomination, and that's it. Because there's this regulation that says everything has to be appointed by the bishop. Um, so,
And obviously, it is a fairly large Catholic population there. But I think
yep.
as recently it's sort of shown, I think where it was sort of founded, well, not founded so much, but when the Republic came together,
Hmm.
it was very, very Catholic dominated, and that was a
True.
huge cultural aspect. But it's not
Hmm.
so relevant now. And I think things like the overwhelming same sex marriage vote a few years back is
Yeah,
an
that's right.
example.
I think in the census, there's 78% of people in the census currently claim to be Catholic. But then there's this question, as you're kind of hinting at, Chris. What does that mean? Does that mean you adhere to every aspect of catechism, or does that
Mm.
mean you were baptized as a Catholic as a child and that was the end of it? And for a lot of people, it's very much a cultural thing. If we're honest, Chris, when a lot of people in Ireland say I'm a Catholic, what they really mean is I'm not one of those British Protestants.
Yeah.
There's very much a cultural aspect to it, and the evidence for that is exactly as you say in the abortion referendum, in the gay marriage referendum, in the blasphemy referendum. There was a 2-to-1 majority against the position of the church. So yeah, the only numerical explanation for that is that there's an awful lot of people who tick the Catholic box in the census but don't really believe in Catholicism. And that was one of the arguments that we had in the hearing. So I represented myself. I have to say, a very um, stressful process. But in the hearing, the counsel for the Department of Defence quoted surveys that they had done within the defence forces, and from memory, I think there's 1% uh, non-Catholic Christians and 5% non-religious, which is a lot less than in the population in general. And they were arguing this is a reason to have all Christian chaplains, but of course they have a Church of Ireland chaplain, and by their own figures, they should have had a non-religious chaplain way before they had a Church of Ireland chaplain. So, yeah, the argument from arithmetic wasn't really in their favour.
No, and I mean it's not only just humanists, I guess, but like you say, there are other religions out there too. I know
Yes.
I actually have Irish Jew heritage going
Okay.
back. It's going back quite a few generations, but
Hmm.
which surprised me. And then when I looked into it, found out that there was actually a sizable amount of people with that sort of descent.
Yep.
But
Ulysses is about a Jewish man, isn't it? This kind of famous Irish novel about a Jewish man.
I'm not too sure
And
which one's that.
I think Leopold Bloom is a character in the James Joyce novel Ulysses. I
Okay.
think I'm right in saying Leopold Bloom is a Jewish man based in Dublin. So, yeah, you're not
There
alone,
you go.
Chris.
Oh, there you go. See, it's there's more like mind you, that's like one small aspect. The funny thing about most of us on this side of the world is there's a lot of Irish, Welsh, English, Scottish. We're kind of one thing we guarantee is that our ancestors would have hated each other at some point, and we'd be disgusted with the fact that we exist. But
Very good.
what can we do? But there are a lot of other religions out there, and I mean, it's for
Yeah.
those who don't know. I mean, people would probably think of the Irish military and not really think that they do too much. But the Irish military are actually one of the main groups involved in UN peacekeeping throughout the world.
Yes, that's right. So I think there's a large deployment at the minute to the Lebanon, and we're not members of NATO. So that I would probably be in a minority in Ireland who thinks that's a bad idea. If there was a referendum on NATO membership, I suspect I would be in a small minority voting for, which means all of the missions done by the Irish military largely relate to UN peacekeeping at the minute in Lebanon. Uh, and of course, that speaks to religiosity in general, because a lot of the areas that they're deployed to are peacekeeping within religiously inspired conflicts. I don't think
Hmm.
religion is irrelevant in the Lebanon conflict either.
Oh no, it's very very relevant, and
Hmm.
especially considering that I guess one of the sides is a Catholic, the Maronite
That's right.
Christians. It would make it would make sense to have a bit of, I guess, diversity of personnel going over.
Hmm.
But I guess I think you're right when you say that there's a lot of people who are Catholic, but really, what does that mean? I
Yeah.
was technically Church of England or Anglican when I was growing up, and
Hmm.
I can count the amount of times we went to church on one hand.
Hmm.
It just didn't happen. I've got friend of mine. Actually, I've got two friends. They're from Glasgow. One's Catholic and a Celtic supporter. The other one's Protestant and a Rangers supporter.
And they're
Both
two
good guys.
friends.
Neither of them would actually talk to each other. They hated each other. The first time they met, it was a very quick "Who's your team?" And as soon as my mate said Celtic, my other mate Bruce just went, "Oh, fuck you, Rangers,"
Yeah,
and that was it. That was the last time they spoke, apart from to relay messages through me and to desperately try and get me to choose their team. So,
that sounds
but
about right.
neither they're so passionate about it, but neither of them have set foot in a church probably in their lives, and neither of
Yeah,
them believe.
I grew up in Belfast, and it's the same in Belfast. I mean, ostensibly, there's a religiously inspired conflict between Catholics and Protestants. And yeah, I mean, my suspicion is you could have achieved the same outcome just by giving the kids green and orange T-shirts when they were young.
Yeah,
There's a lot of tribal in-group, out-group stuff. So if you were to ask Protestants, for example, why they dislike Catholics, you're unlikely to get answers about the theological interpretation of transubstantiation or something like that.
yeah,
Um, I mean, there is a bit of that, of course, Paisley had a go at the Pope, called him the Antichrist. I mean, the next time I see a graffiti saying "No Popery here" or something like that, won't be the first. But yeah, I think it's more tribal than theological to my mind.
yeah. That seems to be the way it is. So I guess moving back to what's happened, what's inspired you, or I guess what made you want to become an army chaplain?
It's a good question. I had been doing a bunch of visits around chaplaincies in third level institutions. So originally that started when I was a member of Atheist Ireland. And
Mhm.
so we would give talks on secular issues that were pertinent at the time, not least some of the referenda that you just mentioned. But very often, some of the chaplaincies will ask you to speak on other topics, like life after death and free will and stuff like that. And I just became aware over time that lots of people who are non-religious have they have an interest in the same big questions, even if they tend to arrive at different answers and are interested to discuss those questions. And then some colleagues at FFRF in the States put me in touch with a guy called Stephen Hewitt. And Stephen, um, he's an Irish citizen, but he's a US Army veteran. He did several tours of Afghanistan and has a Silver Star and combat action badge. And I'll forget the rest of the medals that Staff Sergeant Hewitt won in his service in Afghanistan. But he's an atheist who sought, I guess, an atheist chaplain within the U.S. military and wasn't able to find one. And his argument was something similar to that that I heard very often from students in those third level institutions. And it was something along the lines of counsel from someone of like mind. As Stephen put it, if he was trying to work through issues in his own mind about putting his own life in danger or putting other people's life in danger very deliberately. I guess that brings a lot of issues to the surface in relation to mortality and things like that. And it just was not going to resonate at all for Stephen to talk, for example, to a Roman Catholic priest or an evangelical preacher about those issues. He was seeking counsel from someone of like mind and wasn't able to find it. So that's when I looked at the Defence Forces regulations and discovered why there are only Christian chaplains in the Irish military and tried to do something about it.
Okay. And how long ago did this whole process start? You mentioned it was in court about a year ago, was it?
Yes, that's right. In court about a year ago, and the correspondence started about 3 years before that. So I think 4 years overall.
Okay. And how did the court case play out? I guess what was the outcomes that were?
Yeah. So firstly, as I say, I was representing myself. I was very happy that Michael Nugent was a witness for me. So I'm very grateful that he was there, so that I wasn't on my own, basically. So he didn't have very much to say as a witness, but it was just good to have someone else there, because on the other side of the table from me, there were some people from the Chief State Solicitor's Office in Ireland who had briefed a barrister, and the barrister was doing all the talking. And then there were three people from the Irish military in dress uniform, a captain, a corporal, and a chaplain. And they had a bunch of arguments prepared to defend as best they could the idea that all of the chaplains should be Christian. There was the numerical argument that we've kind of touched on already. And then the one that surprised me most was the argument from Hezbollah. So we had this, well, I was about to say octogenarian priest, which he was, but it shouldn't be ageist. But his evidence related to the idea of a force multiplier. He described himself as a force multiplier. And what he meant by that was, as again the captain described, he has previously had to move armored columns through particular villages where Hezbollah had a strong presence in Lebanon. And what he would do is go and talk to some of the armed groups in advance and say, we're coming through at this time, there's going to be this number of vehicles, please don't attack the armored cars. And his view of the world was, look, it's much more effective if I have a chaplain to turn up and say that rather than me say it with a rifle over my shoulder. So in that sense, he said the chaplains were force multipliers because they could increase the efficacy of the of the troops.
But the crazy thing is, I mean, Hezbollah don't deal exclusively with Catholic chaplains, obviously.
Well, this was the argument that I made, that the position they had to defend was not that chaplains were a good idea. The position that they had to defend was it's necessary that the chaplains must be Christian. And what I asked him was, have you ever heard Western white armies referred to as crusaders while you were there? And of course he had. And I was suggesting, well, if you needed someone to negotiate with Hezbollah, and you're thinking that a chaplain might be a good person to do that, would it not be better if the chaplain happened to be a Shia fundamentalist? Would they not be more acceptable to Hezbollah than a Christian crusader? And he accepted that was true. And so the next obvious question was, well, why don't you sack all 15 of the Catholic chaplains and hire 15 Shia Islamist chaplains? I mean, if his argument was this is all to do with force protection and we have to make the troops as safe as possible, then why have you got all these Catholic chaplains? Surely you want Islamic fundamentalist chaplains in that case.
Well, that would make sense, wouldn't it?
Well, that would be the logic of his position, but I think what I was trying to highlight was that the real reason why there are only Christian chaplains is exactly the one that you mentioned at the start of the discussion, Chris. Ireland is a very historically Catholic country. This is an old provision that goes back many decades when it wasn't controversial, because why would it be controversial when Ireland was a monotone Catholic country, but it's no longer a monotone Catholic country? So there's plenty of people who would make good chaplains who happen not to be Catholics, and they're excluded from the job. And as I mentioned also, all 16 of the chaplains at the minute are male. And that's not an accident. If you let the bishops pick the chaplains, they're going to pick priests. And it's not an accident that all of the Catholic priests are male. So essentially, you're excluding all females from the role too.
Well, yeah. Well, that's a good point. So with the is it a set limit? Like, is there a limit to how many chaplains they can have in the Irish Army? Like, is there any reason they couldn't say, well, we've got this number of Catholic chaplains. Okay, that's fine. We're prepared to add some more, or on a percentage.
Yeah.
I know that, and for those who don't know, my area of expertise in history is Australian military chaplains during the First World War. So it's the history of chaplaincy is something I've got a pretty good understanding of, and I know that in the Australian sense, what they did was they did split the number of chaplains down roughly what they called the percentages of people who were or the population, and there was a bit of an argument and a push from the Anglicans, who were the majority, to have more, and similar arguments to what you've had. It sounds like happened years later, but they did have. I know there was a Jewish chaplain in the Australian Army who,
very good.
in all fairness, didn't have a lot to do. And there was a few others as well. I believe there was an Islamic representative as well, and a few others. But we have got a similar thing here where you couldn't be an atheist and be a chaplain, which interestingly maybe is something that needs to be looked at. But is there any reason that any extra couldn't be added to the 15, or is it just that's what they've set? Is it a paid thing, a volunteer thing, or?
No, they used to have 19 a few years ago. There have been some cuts to the military budget in general, so my suspicion is 19 went down to 15 for that reason. But my argument was that there are a bunch of other Irish public services that hire chaplains on an objective basis. So the Irish Prison Service, for example, when they want to hire a chaplain, they'll publish a job description. They'll advertise that job description openly. They'll invite applications and interview and make an appointment to the best candidate for the job. And maybe that will be a Catholic priest sometimes. If a Catholic priest is the best candidate for the job, that's who should get the job. But my argument was, the next time there's a vacancy, and there was a particular vacancy in my case, a particular position became open in the barracks nearest me, and I was keen to apply for the job, but I wasn't allowed because it was appointed by the bishop. So my case was that in future the role should be advertised publicly and appointed based on objective criteria to the best candidate. So I guess in your background then, Chris, you would have heard this phrase that I heard a lot throughout the process, which is, there are no atheists in foxholes.
I have heard that once or twice. Yeah,
I
have. It's having read some of the stories of the chaplains, in particular the Gallipoli landing, there was some interesting, I guess, differences between some of them. The Catholic chaplains in particular weren't I'll say they weren't the bravest bunch of the Australians. There was one in particular who absolutely was. He refused. He had to storm the beach with his troops, but I remember a story about there was a couple of chaplains doing service. They had to do mass services, and they heard a man who was in no man's land, and he was basically dying but in agony.
Yeah.
So the chaplain this guy was a Presbyterian chaplain and an ex-Edinburgh rifleman, and sort of very much a military man through and through.
Yeah.
And he was there with a Catholic chaplain, and he said, "Come on, let's go and get this fellow. Let's go and get him." And the Catholics turned around and said, "No, not for me, not for me." He went and got a similar response from another Catholic before eventually getting an Anglican who they dragged this fellow out of no man's land. Unfortunately, the Presbyterian chaplain got shot and became the first chaplain who was first chaplain casualty in
Oh
Australian
dear,
military
that's
history.
awful.
But it was there was very much a difference in attitude between them, but I wouldn't suggest that, and even between the Presbyterians, there was some who their job was really just to kind of go to the hospitals and talk to people who were hurting, and they were almost in a way the counsellors before counsellors
Yes.
were a thing. So it was very much in those early days I'd say a very fluid role. The
Yeah.
paper I wrote was on the differences actually between the activities of chaplains
That's
from when
interesting.
they first went to when they led. But anyway, I could talk about that for hours. So the
That's
big
a really
question is,
interesting area.
yeah, it is. It's one that, as an atheist, I kind of stumbled into almost by
Hmm.
mistake. Intended originally to research it for the purpose of showing how that they'd used war and conflict to recruit people to religion. And then when I started reading some of the stories, I found something very different, but a very interesting story nonetheless. And
Hmm.
the only work that had ever been done on it was by religious people. So I thought, well, someone secular needs to
For sure.
tackle this. There needs to be an outside perspective. But
Yes.
I could go on about it for hours. So how did the case end? How's it end?
So we we won the case happily.
Oh, okay. Not too sure what's happened there, but for those who are listening, we've actually just lost John. So hopefully he will be back momentarily. He does have the link. Hang on, we've got him back there. 1 second.
Sorry, not sure what happened there.
No, that's all right. We heard you won the case and then you dropped out. So it's
Yes,
obviously God was angry at you and dropped you out of the screen.
perhaps. Yeah, so we won the case, and the Minister for Defence has now been ordered to change the Defence Force regulations, and instructed that all future appointments to the chaplaincy must be done on an objective basis. So from a legal perspective, what it comes down to is that the particular act in question is called the Employment Equality Act. It says you can't discriminate based on religion or a bunch of other protected criteria in employment, and that is inherited into Irish law from European equality law. So essentially, this comes from the European Court of Human Rights. And what it was explained to the Department of Defence, which you imagine they might have thought of already, is yeah, you have these little rules that you've written in your Defence Force booklet there. The European Court of Human Rights doesn't care what it says in your booklet. You're not allowed to discriminate based on religion, and yeah, whatever rules that you have within the army do not trump the European Court of Human Rights. So what the Department of Defence has been instructed is, here's the requirements from the Employment Equality Act. I don't care what it says in your little rule book, you will follow these requirements the next time you appoint a chaplain.
Well, there you go. So obviously that doesn't mean that they must appoint you, or
Correct.
where are you in that process? Are you going to apply?
Well, I've been actually in touch with. I shouldn't mention any names because this person is in the middle of a legal process themselves. But suffice to say, someone who's not a Roman Catholic priest will be applying for the next vacancy, and
Mhm.
I very much hope they get the role.
Oh, excellent. That's good
I
to
very
hear.
much hope she gets the role.
Even better, even
Hmm.
better. That'll turn a few heads. So I guess the thing I originally got you on to talk about um, is obviously the I don't know what we would call it, the shit fight that is Atheist Alliance International. Like I think anyone, and I've covered it a little bit here
Hmm.
on the channel, but what a fucking basket case! Like
It just
seriously,
keeps going and going.
it's a comedy of errors. It's every time you think that it's going to get to a point where something could be resolved, they just
Yeah,
double down, and yeah,
and
so
most often self-inflicted as well.
yeah,
So the recent case that we'd been discussing previously, Chris, is this document that they published. They call it the disclosure document. And by the way, no one asked them to write this document. This was completely unsolicited. They just came out with it one day. Here's a bunch of disclosures, and even what they admitted to is pretty appalling. But their view was, well, we've admitted this, so now we can kind of carry on regardless. And to draw a line under the whole thing, what they did was they arranged an emergency general meeting. So the premise for the emergency general meeting was they said to their members, here's all of these disclosures. If anyone has any questions about any of this stuff, just ask. All you have to do is ask. We'll answer any questions. Full disclosure is the only way to draw a line under everything. And they received a bunch of questions from some paid up members and then refused to answer them. And they had the emergency general meeting. There were a bunch of questions there. I think 30 questions in all from paid up member Preston Jensen. And so, one of the affiliate groups, I think it was one of the former Muslim groups, uh, submitted a motion, which was seconded, if I'm correctly remembering, by one of the Canadian groups. And the motion asked the board to answer these 30 questions. And everyone on the board argued against and argued that they shouldn't be required to answer these questions. And the motion was defeated, and that's where we are.
yeah, and see that's the baffling thing. I mean, they obviously realized that there was enough going on in the background that they had to have this disclosure document, which
Mm-hmm.
really was where they kind of admitted to a couple of things in a roundabout way,
Yeah,
but you know, not enough to really bury themselves. It was
yeah,
like the oh, okay, I'm going to admit to doing this little thing wrong, hoping you don't see the big thing that's like right in front.
precisely.
But like you said, the whole will answer any question, but then didn't. Like, it's I saw the list of questions that Preston had, which I thought
Mm-hmm.
were reasonable questions, and should have been questions that were easily answered. And I mean, the reason they had this emergency meeting was, as I was told, to work out what they were going to do, where the members would have the choice to, you know, they could sack the board, they could close down AAI, pretty much do whatever it was, you know, we are putting it in the hands of the members. And they did everything but that. I mean, didn't the meeting start with a couple of volunteers talking about how wonderful the board was and basically blowing smoke up their ass?
That's right. That's right. And then had this outrageous attack on Michael Nugent, which every time I think about it, it's hilarious. Um, but yeah, I mean, the whole thing is just crazy. Firstly, on the questions they refuse to answer, as you might recall, Chris, it's not like they were asked to, write an essay in response to every question to explain lots of detail. A lot of the questions were yes no answers. The ones that weren't yes no answers were asking for dates and things like that. Um, and they had explained that they had just rigorously researched all of these issues, so all of the details should have been at their fingertips. But still, they had this argument that said, no, we can't answer the questions because we're too busy saving atheists' lives, and if we stop to answer the questions, then atheists will die.
Oh, that's right.
They
It was we can't do this because it's going to kill atheists. Why do you want
That's
to
right.
kill atheists?
That's right. They
Like,
put a number on it, 18 or
oh man.
19. 18 or 19 atheists will die if they answer these questions.
Because
Um,
you can just imagine like Bill Flavell, he's putting his suit on and running around, pretending to fly and saving atheists because he's
that's
like
right.
James Bond. They can't do it without it. But I mean, they do more harm with their actions. They do more harm to atheists globally Because I mean, essentially, all they do is, I mean, let's have a look. I mean, I know when you had John Richards
Yeah,
on your channel, and he wanted to play the little propaganda video that someone in the sixth grade put together,
that's
you know,
right.
with
He
all the
put his
wonderful things on.
underpants on over his tights and explained
Yeah.
all the lives he saved.
Oh, but I mean, essentially, all they've done is set up GoFundmes.
Exactly.
I mean, my understanding is they're meant to be an organization where all these other organizations who do things like that are affiliated with them, but
Yes,
Atheist Alliance International represents the interest on a global scale. They go and present to the United Nations, and that's their role, not to run GoFundMe's.
exactly. And the biggest irony is when I mean they got rid of Michael Sherlock, and the first thing that Michael Sherlock did after he left Atheist Alliance International was to start a GoFundMe for a particular deserving cause. Um, so, like, I mean, you don't have to be an AAI to start a GoFundMe. You know that they could all leave AAI tomorrow and still do exactly the same GoFundMes that they're already doing. Um, so, and, I mean, I presume some of the causes are very worthy. I've donated to many of them. I have no problems with any of the causes that they're supporting. But my real concern is this pretense, as you say, that they're like international rescue and Thunderbirds are go, and they're because they're putting this message out that if you're an atheist in danger, and there are atheists in real danger. I mean, we all remember the stories of the Bangladeshi bloggers and all of these horrific stories. But they're putting these messages out to say, if you're in these appalling circumstances, you just contact AAI and we're going to save you. And they're really not. It's half a dozen people with laptops. That's what we're talking about here.
But
And
didn't at one stage didn't they have someone who was there, or one of their associates who was in charge of helping these people supposedly, who was actually an Islamic activist who was just then passing the details of these people on?
that's right. You can still look him up. His name is Manoj John White. If you look him up on LinkedIn, his LinkedIn profile still says that he's a director of AAI. But he got in touch with AAI and said, "You've got a lot of these cases in India, and I'm based in India, and I can help these people out for you." And they said, "That sounds like a great idea. There's someone in India is going to help us out with our Atheists in Danger campaign. So any atheists in danger from Islamic fundamentalists in the area were put in touch with this guy, who turned out to be an Islamist himself, who was, I mean, the whole thing was a ways to get him in touch with a particular set of apostates. So, yeah, I mean,
But where's I
just
mean, where's the due diligence there? Where's the wouldn't you do some kind before you give someone a role like this that obviously they wouldn't have had much contact with before? How hard would it be to do some kind of background check, to have a private investigator in India, which isn't going to cost a lot of money, as we know
yeah.
from John Richards. You can pay Indians next to nothing. Um, and yeah, how hard would that be? I mean, wouldn't that be money better spent rather than giving $2,000 to one of the director's daughters for advice on a website?
Yeah, exactly. And so, how much does it cost to do all the background checks? If I'm honest, I don't know. I should say this issue came up when I was secretary. I was secretary for a few years at AAI. What we decided to do at the time was to focus on things like letters of support to atheists in asylum cases, uh, and things like that, because we just didn't have the resource or the competence to pretend that we were the UNHCR. I mean, AI is not Amnesty. It does not
Hmm.
have offices all around the place. It does not have anyone who is trained or is competent in this particular area. So, yeah, my concern is they're just going to do more harm than good by promising things that they can't deliver, and yeah,
I mean, see, I would think that that would be more the role of an affiliate organisation. Like that's
Yes.
it's not the role. The role of AAI to once again, to my understanding, is to represent on a global scale. I mean, you wouldn't have the Pope, for instance, intervening in local issues, but he would go and speak at the United Nations, and I think
Yeah.
that is the role, to stand up on that global scale, the big picture issues rather than the localized issues.
Exactly.
Certain support groups, or maybe even work towards setting up groups in these places where appropriate.
Hmm.
But you've got to, I guess, stay in your lane. Stick to what you need to do. It's got
Yeah.
to I wondered which John you were referring to, but got it now. He's famous, John Richards. He's famous.
Yeah, you got John Richards there in the UK and Bill Flavelle in the UK and a few more people like that. And I mean, the kind of people we're talking about, Chris. However well-meaning they might be, they they are not international rescue. This is not Team America that's going to turn up at your door when there's a mob with pitchforks outside,
No,
and they really shouldn't be pretending that they're anything like that.
see, I question how well-meaning. I mean, it's all good to say that I guess people get into this for the right reasons, but I think there's some underlying wrong reasons in there. I mean, I look at John in particular, and all I see is a man with an ego. He was there so he could pat himself on the back and have people say, "Oh, John, you're wonderful."
Hmm.
And from what I've seen, I mean, I haven't had a lot of, I've had some correspondence with Bill Flavelle, but from what I've seen from the outside looking in, there seems to be a bit of that as well. It's a bit of that, I guess you'd call it the British savior sort of complex.
Born to rule.
So yeah, there's a lot of that. It's so I don't think it is the right reasons that they're doing it. I mean, if it was the right reasons, what they do is they would pass it on to people who are clearly more qualified to actually do it rather than just themselves, because they clearly are. I mean, these people couldn't run a fucking chook raffle at a club. Like they're
Yeah, well,
terrible.
for sure, I think part of the reason is what you mentioned earlier, Chris, that setting up a GoFundMe is not difficult. Because
No,
the other thing you might have to do is go and turn up at the United Nations in New York or Geneva or somewhere else and sit in a big room with lots of well informed people who've done the research and make an argument. And that's not easy. So yeah, a few clicks on GoFundMe.com is certainly a lot easier than turning up at the United Nations to make an argument.
I mean, just for a second, just imagine that John Richards at the UN. You picture that. He said, "I've got a 2-minute video to show everyone. Watch this."
he could he could sell them some branded AAI water bottles, perhaps.
The only problem is you wouldn't be able to mute everyone.
That was
Talk
funny.
over the top, but
That was funny.
although maybe he's not the person. Maybe he's good friend Tercia. For those who didn't see,
Oh goodness.
I'll let you tell the Tercia story.
Okay, so and build up to Tercia. So John's contribution was firstly, as you said earlier, Chris. He announced that $6,000 per annum is an absolute fortune to pay anyone in India. Scandal that you would pay anyone in India that amount. And then he explained to uh, three Irish people that he had just been watching the Commonwealth Games in England, and he had all these Commonwealth countries coming to England to talk to each other and have these good-natured games. And maybe you people in Ireland wouldn't understand that because you only know how to converse through violence.
Hey,
and
no, no. I know. Okay,
honestly,
he said some stupid things, but seriously,
yeah, he said maybe you wouldn't understand that because you only know how to resolve your problems through violence or something like that.
fucking hell.
And then we went from there to Tercia, his co-host, who is a white South African. And when I complained that there was really very serious corruption of the democratic process in
Now,
AAI.
just to be clear, Tercia was there as a neutral mediator.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, his
Uh,
co-host. Yeah.
I hope you're doing air quotes around that, Chris, that I can
I
see.
can, I can absolutely promise there was a lot of air quotes.
Very good. So yes, Tercia interrupted when I complained about the corruption of democratic legitimacy at AAI, and she interrupted to say, "Well, what's so good about democracy anyway?" And I thought, okay, I'm going to have to explain why democracy is better than autocracy to Tercia. This sounds like a difficult conversation. But there was no stopping Tercia. She went straight into all of the problems in South Africa at present. The main problem, as Tercia explained in South Africa, is too much democracy for the ANC.
That's right. And I think I can't remember the exact wording she said, but you need someone to just take control. So she
That's right.
basically was pro dictator, down with democracy. So
Tercia is
probably
just
the
looking for a
perfect person
strong,
for the current
charismatic
AFL
leader.
board. But actually, and I'll get back to something that you mentioned there that I thought was interesting, and it's kind of the way it's. I guess what's come out into the light has kind of you almost want to laugh, but you want to cry. With so when they co-opted the board. Now for those who are listening, I'm assuming a lot of background knowledge. If you don't, I'll put a link to I guess a bit of a background to AAI in the description down below. But AAI is the gift that just keeps on giving. So what had happened was there was we'll call it the coup, where they took over, and John Richards came in, and one of the first things they did was they sacked the editor of the Secular World magazine, who was
Yep.
being paid $6,000 a year. And John's reasoning for that was because $6,000 a year is just too much to pay someone in India. It's just way too much. And that was a cost that they were going to cut out because they were in such dire financial strife that they needed to cut that cost out. And he took it over, and according to him initially, did it for free. However, when the disclosure document came out, something rather different came to light, which was that John Richards sacked the editor, the Indian editor, because you can't pay an Indian that much money, heaven forbid. And he did take on the role himself, but he didn't do it for free.
So scandalized was John Richards at the idea of paying someone 6,000 per year to edit the magazine that he had to immediately pay himself the 6,000 a year for editing the magazine. So
Yeah, well,
good grief.
it's, in all fairness, he probably should have given himself a pay rise just by virtue of the fact that he's British.
That's right.
It's
That's right.
it's you can just imagine that AEO's got this pay scale of what they'll pay an Indian and what they'll pay someone from the UK. Well, but I mean, they paid. Okay, so that was $6,000 for a year for someone in India to edit a magazine, but then the secretary, Bill Flavelle, they paid his daughter, what was it, $2,000 for one day's work or something stupid like that.
I'm not too sure what it is when converted into dollars. It wasn't the same kind of figure that they paid John Richards. But firstly, if anyone knows anything, even if you don't know anything about web development out there, what they did was they hired a web development agency to build a new website. That's fine, and then they realized that they were somehow unable to talk to the web development agency themselves. So they had to hire someone to talk to the web development agency on their behalf. And they decided to hire Bill Flavelle's daughter. And we had this wonderful comment in the minutes of the meeting where it said that fantastic use of the passive voice. It was decided that Leah Flavelle was well qualified for the job. It was decided that. Very good. Who decided that, Bill?
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, they just happened to look up web developers, and hers was the
Exactly.
name that
The
coincidentally came out. I'm sure Bill said, "Oh no, that is my
the
daughter. I must step back."
the international board of AAI, with representatives from every continent in the world, somehow landed on Leah Flavel as a person they thought might be well qualified for the job. Bill was shocked, I can tell you. What were the
I,
odds,
I, I
Chris? What
imagine.
were
I
the
imagine. But I'm sure proud that globally it was his daughter that was selected, and of course he had to do a lot of arm twisting there too. I mean, why didn't they just go and get someone from India? I mean, on the John Richards pay scale, they probably could have paid him $5.
Exactly that, exactly that. But I'll tell you what the real question is that this raises. So one of the admissions in the disclosure document is for this year in question that we're discussing, when these, I think, entirely improper payments were made. For that year and for the two subsequent years, they admitted that they did not keep adequate financial records. They have said that they have tried to reconstruct the financial accounts, if I can use their word, by inferring. They inferred what some of the payments were for. In other words, they guessed, they made it up. They don't know what the money was spent on. Um, so, I mean, this is other people's money. This was
Yeah.
not Bill or John Richards' money. They now cannot tell you for a 3 year period what the money was spent on. What they're willing to discuss, the things that they're willing to say they spent the money on, are a contract for Bill Flavel's daughter awarded without advertisement or tender, and a contract for John Richards, which was taken off someone else entirely improperly in
Mm.
order to give it to John Richards. So that's what they're willing to talk about. And then the next question is, well, what else happened to the rest of the money, folks, over those 3 years? And nobody knows.
But I mean, it's not like there would be numerous transactions. I mean, there would be limited transactions. There would be a bank account, and there would have to be a paper trail. I
There
mean, if
should be.
someone's gone to a branch and pulled out cash, well, then they need to explain what that is or pay it back.
The vast majority of it is through PayPal, and I suspect most people know you can look up the PayPal statements,
Mm.
and it is not a mystery to figure out where the payments went. If you're making
Mm.
payments through PayPal, it is not incredibly difficult to figure out where the money went, but still nobody knows.
Yeah, J.
Not,
Richards, L. Flavel.
Well, I'll tell you, the people who were properly in democratic control of the bank account, the people who raised the funds that were in the bank account, there was tens of thousands of dollars in this bank account that was largely raised through membership subscriptions and donations. Another one of their admissions in the disclosure document is that they improperly expelled 14 atheist groups from around the world. And they just kind of dropped this in as a casual thing. Oh, yeah, sorry about that. But that's not just any 14 groups. Those are the 14 groups who built the organization
Mm.
and who raised those tens of thousands of dollars through their membership subscriptions. Those are the 14 groups who were properly in control of the money that Bill Flavel and John Richards were spending. And no one has made any effort whatsoever to tell any of those groups, this is what we spent your money on. No effort
Which,
whatsoever.
which I mean, for any organization, you have to. I mean, every organization I've ever been a part of has detailed accounts that
Mm-hmm.
are presented at the AGM. They're there on display, and anyone who wants a copy, who is a member, can
Yep.
request that copy. I mean, that is standard for
Yep.
any organization. And I mean, it's done not only for legal reasons, but for transparency, because you want to know that where you're sending your money and the people who you are entrusting with the money, but also with the organization that you're investing your time into,
Mm-hmm.
you want to know where that is going. It's
Yeah,
just simple.
I can tell you when I was on the board, Chris, and we were voting and making decisions on different expenditures, when it came to the AGM, the first thing that I wanted to do, and I think everyone else who was on the board with me wanted to do, was to account immediately for every single cent that was spent, because when we were talking to the members in the AGM, we were talking to the people who raised the money that we were spending. And I mean, I think it's just human nature. The first thing that you want to do is to account to the people who control properly control the funds that you're spending, to say, look, here's what I did. Here's where every single cent is accounted for.
Mm.
But these folks have done precisely the opposite. In fact, they changed the bylaws to remove from the bylaws the requirement that they should publish accounts. And that's why they lost their status as a non-profit, because they refused to publish accounts.
Which to lose that status is insane. But
Mm.
just, I mean, the transparency. I mean, for me, I know when I've sat on boards and I've headed up organisations.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted as many people to have eyes on all of that as possible, because the last thing
Absolutely.
I wanted was, if there was ever any suggestion of someone acting inappropriately, I wanted to be able to say, here is everything.
Exactly.
Everything is accounted for, every last dollar. Where there's been an error, it's been adjusted and fixed,
Mm-hmm.
which happens sometimes.
For
I
sure.
remember there was a situation with one group where we accidentally overpaid someone. We
Mm-hmm.
realised they paid it back, and that was all in there, and it was disclosed at the next general meeting. It was
Yep.
black and white, because you don't need that kind of stuff hanging over you when you're heading. I mean, legal reasons aside, I mean, you've got your reputational reasons, moral reasons. It's
Mm-hmm.
just, you want to think, if you're going to give your time to an organization, it's for the right reasons. But I just don't see that with the current board of AAI. It's like they're a bunch of people who are just desperate to cling on to power. They're desperate to, have on their LinkedIn profile that, president or secretary or bloody, chief bloody grand poobah of AAI.
Yeah, I think there's certainly a lot of CV polishing that explains the behavior. There's also just, I mean, we talked about tribalism earlier, but there is a kind of us versus them mentality now.
Mm.
When we get some of, I should say, there's been quite a few people actually who have been insiders unhappy with how the place is being managed, and have published some of the internal communications. And when we see some of their internal emails, you can just see, don't let these people win. And
Mm.
yeah, I mean, when they're talking about these people, they're talking about the members looking for the financials. Don't let them win, kind of thing. But still, it's there is very much a tribal attitude of us versus them, and I think that come out again at the EGM. I mentioned this outrageous attack on Michael Nugent. This is
That
funny.
baffled me. That baffled me.
Uh,
If you want to give the background on that
yeah.
really quickly.
So there's it won't take long. Michael's a vegan, and he tweeted this picture of just an enormous amount of soybeans that he had cooked, and he was boxing it all up in the separate boxes, and he was going to freeze it. And okay, so he tweeted this, and he was kind of having a bit of fun at his own expense. And I responded just with a one-word tweet that said "prepper." For anyone who doesn't know, people who are kind of build their own bunker in the States to get ready for the coming apocalypse will be called a prepper. So Michael responded, "Well, I'll be okay when AI collapses," by which he meant AI have this idea that they're out there saving all of the atheists. And if AI collapses, then Michael, as an atheist, will be in physical danger. Therefore, he'll be okay in his bunker with all his soybeans. Haha, okay. And this tweet from Michael was read out. It's a tweet about fucking soybeans, but this was
Yeah.
read out at the AAI EGM as if Michael is trying to collapse AAI, and it's Michael's goal to kill the organization. And in absolute outrage tones, There was lots of weeping and gnashing of teeth about how anyone could have this attitude to
Well,
AI.
he's literally killing atheists.
Oh my god! Like anyone who read Michael's tweet and thought Michael's intention here was something to do with killing AI is like just shouldn't be allowed out without adult supervision. It was just utterly bizarre.
I mean, the joke from Michael was kind of, it was chuckle worthy, but
Yes,
I think the overreaction from AI was truly hilarious. Like, it
exactly
was,
that.
you know,
Exactly that.
I'm amazed they didn't want to burn him at the stake for daring to speak against the orthodoxy or something. It was.
Yeah, it could have been suspended without pay for 30 days for using a bad word, Chris. You never know.
Oh yeah, now that's something I remember when that happened, and I saw that play out live, and that was for those who don't know, Michael Sherlock. He was well, he wasn't president. What was he? He was CEO, I think.
Executive director,
Yeah, so it was a paid
but
position
a
within,
paid employee, yes.
within AAI, and he'd put out a tweet about, I think it was a fundraiser, and he put at the end, just showing how religion is retarded. Now, Michael's Australian, and for us, if we use that word in Australia, it's it's the actual meaning of the word. It's not something that's used as a, well, I mean, it can
Yeah.
be used as a slur, but there's a lot of things that can be used as a slur depending on the context. And the context of this was clearly religion is retarded, as in the actual meaning of the word
Yes.
retarded.
Like the speed
So
of light is retarded in
yeah,
substances with a higher refractive index.
exactly. I
And
wouldn't have
I
put it
think Michael
quite
wrote
that
a blog
nicely,
about
but
it as well, didn't he? He wrote a blog
sorry,
about it explaining he used the word as a synonym for slowed down or held back
yeah,
or something like that.
yeah, which is what it means. But of
Mm.
course, then the woke activists from America jumped onto it, and
Yep.
one in particular who to say that she is a woke lunatic would, I think, to be very unkind to woke lunatics, because she will just jump on everything like that, and instead of focusing on, hey, we're trying to save someone here, it was the attention seeking, you said a nasty word.
Hmm.
And whether right or wrong, and I've spoken to Michael, and I told him that I probably wouldn't have handled it that way myself, and but I didn't
Yep.
disagree with the sentiment. I believe his words were "fuck off, you cunt," or
Yeah.
something like
And
that.
if correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but I know that word has a really heavy valence in the states, particularly in California. Um, but it doesn't have quite the same import in Australia, as I understand it, or Scotland. Actually, it's a term of endearment in Scotland very often.
Yeah. Look, it's probably a bit the same. I mean, it can go both ways here. Like if
Hmm.
I were to say to you in a certain tone, John, you're a cunt,
Hmm.
then that would be me insulting you in a
Yeah.
way. But it wouldn't be. In fact, this video is demonetized, isn't it? This if the explicit warning is going to be on it. But if I were to say, I was having a chat to John, he's a fucking good cunt, that guy. It's a term of endearment. So
Yeah.
it's obviously it's the word means what it means. I don't necessarily think it's it can be used as an insult. It can be. I don't actually know why it's an insult, but anyway,
Yeah,
it's
but the big issue, at least in my mind, was that AI created this disciplinary committee, and the published decision from their disciplinary committee, it's still on their website if anyone wants to look at atheistalliance.org and a page titled Michael Sherlock, it's still up there. It says that they considered his use of the word retarded. They accepted that he used it as a synonym for slowed down or held back, and it was not directed at a person. He used it as an adjective to describe religion as an idea. He didn't direct it at any person, uh, and he didn't intend it in the offensive way that the recipient found it to land on their ear. But nevertheless, they said it's still an offensive word, and he shouldn't use it. And that was part of the reason why he was suspended for 30 days without pay, which to my mind is just like it's just a secular blasphemy is what
Yeah,
they've implemented. And
yeah. Well,
in a context where
exactly.
people are uh, conducting campaigns across atheist groups against actual blasphemy laws, for AAI to be introducing their own blasphemy rule is just utterly bizarre.
The irony isn't lost, is it?
Mm.
But I mean, look, Michael, he was fairly brash, and look, one thing I think he saw that was a big issue and was very uh, vocal about and on the offence was the I guess the seeming takeover of atheist organisations by left wing American
Yes.
extremists, all the, as you can't say this word, and which is a religion in and of itself.
Hmm.
But yeah, it was they suspended him for that. But yet the same people who suspended, I saw the way that they spoke to Shirley Rivera.
Yep, that's right.
So
Uh,
they had absolutely no qualms in literally speaking to someone in some really just horrendous
yeah.
terms.
So Shirley was a director of the organization who was asking some questions to FOTUS and what's the president at the time's name? Howard. So Howard was the president, Fotis was the treasurer, and Shirley was a director of the organization, asking some questions about how they were providing documents to the CPA, to the accountant who was going to produce the accounts. And Howard, the then president, responded to Shirley and said, "It's not your fucking job. Me and Fotis are doing this."
Mm.
So, firstly, not only is it Shirley's job as a director to take an interest in the financial accounts, it's her obligation.
It's
She's
literally,
absolutely required to understand what's going on with the
yeah.
accounts. Uh, and yeah, she was told, look, you go over there and do your little thing, whatever that is, Shirley. Um, Howard and Fotis are going to look after the accounts, and don't you be taking an interest in this in a very pat in the head type of a way.
Yeah,
So that
but
I mean,
it's a disgusting born to rule mentality again.
yep,
Australia, she's just from Latin America. Not like us great, saviors.
yep. And as you're implying as well, Chris, the language involved, like she was literally told, it's not your fucking job by the president. It's like she's a volunteer director in the organization trying to
Hmm.
do her bit, and that's the way she's spoken to by the president. And these are the people who suspended Michael Sherlock for 30 days without pay for using the
And
bad
incidentally,
R
I can
word.
tell you, Shirley is a far more impressive and intelligent person than any of those
Absolutely.
people on the board, and that's not just a an opinion. That I will put that down. That is an absolute objective fact. She
Yes,
is miles ahead of those clowns,
the
and they were
Sherlometer is
lucky to have
superb
her there. They were lucky to have her there.
for
But
sure.
it's the second you start questioning where the money went, that's when they like to suspend and disappear
Hmm.
and go on the attack. It seems to sort of be their method of action. But look, there's no question that they're a well, I'll come out and say it. I don't care. They can sue me. They're a corrupt organization. They're absolutely corrupt. And if they want to sue me, I fucking welcome it because I will absolutely love to do that discovery. I will do that discovery all day.
Yeah, I have no hesitation in describing the people controlling that organization as absolutely corrupt,
Mm.
for sure.
Corrupt is probably a very accurate word. Maybe there's a bit of incompetence there too. Actually, probably both. There's certainly
Bit of
incompetence.
both.
Actually,
A
there's
little
no
from
doubt
column
about
A
that.
and a little from column B.
Yeah, but actually, a lot from column A and a lot from column B. I think they're interesting. So what's next? Where do we go from here with AAI? Because it seems as though they, despite everything, they've still managed to hang on to the reins.
Yeah, well, the big problem, of course, with their disclosure document is that it's written by the people who were being investigated. So, I mean, the shortest summary of the disclosure document is Bill has investigated the actions of Bill and decided that Bill did nothing wrong. Um,
No,
and
Bill should be applauded.
Exactly. And this is in stark contrast to the previous two presidents. So the previous president to the current incumbent was Nina Sankari, and before Nina was David Ornstein, and both of those people promised an independent investigation. Um, I guess Brian Kernick, who's the current president, reneged on that and allowed Bill to investigate Bill. But that's just never going to have any credibility. So they need to figure out a way to do some kind of independent investigation. It wouldn't be difficult to do. I don't think it would be expensive. There are lots of atheist and humanist groups around the world. There are lots of competent people. All you need to do is give someone access to the Google Drive and the Google email groups that they use, and just look at who said what in relation to the contentious issues. So we came back to the 30 questions that Princeton Jensen asked. A lot of those questions relate to how come this group was a member and got a vote, how come that group was a member and got a vote, and we just need to look up the emails to see, well, who was invited to the vote and who wasn't, and why was that. And that's all that needs to happen. But Bill can't do it. But Bill's the guy who's responsible for the wrongdoing, which requires an investigation in the first place. And so to have Bill do it is clearly absurd. Whether they'll ever allow someone independent to take a look, I don't know. I suspect it's not a coincidence that there has never been anyone independent allowed to take a look.
No, well, they don't want the truth to come out.
Mm-hmm.
I think the second that there's an independent investigation, it would absolutely bury these people.
Yeah.
So the only thing that they've potentially got protecting them is that they're not in the United States. If they're in the United States, I think there would be a case to prosecute them. But I think because they're overseas, I think the cost and the likelihood of prosecution is probably very low. But I
Yeah.
think at the very least, they should be taken out of the. I mean, this is a charity registered in California.
Yeah,
They need to.
I think it's important to understand what the nature of the allegations is, because I suspect a lot of people will be listening to this and they'll be thinking, well, who are the members? Can the members not vote for a new board? And the problem is that Bill picked the members. So I've mentioned he already admitted to expelling 14 groups entirely improperly. That's not an allegation. That's what the man's admitted to. He's also admitted to stacking the voter rolls with his mates, essentially. So an example of that is that the week before the vote, where, as you mentioned earlier, Chris, the coup happened, um, the Atheist Union of Greece were contacted by the leaders of the coup. They were offered membership for $1. I should say, when Atheist Ireland were members, Atheist Ireland was paying roughly 500 times that. But someone decided the Atheist Union of Greece should be offered membership for $1. That was paid by Fotis, who immediately he gave his proxy votes to Bill, and
That's nice of
immediately
him.
after the vote was co-opted onto the board. So basically, what Bill did was he got rid of the previous membership, which included the Freedom from Religion Foundation. It included Mariam Namazi's Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain.
And like
including
these are
in the
groups that were
environment.
founding members as well, like Freedom from Religion
Exactly,
was founding member,
exactly.
wasn't it?
So all of those groups were kicked out, and he got in essentially a bunch of his mates. Now, sometimes the people who he got in turned out to be, as he might put it, a bit uppity, and they had to be got rid of. See Shirley and others along those lines. So basically, the members are who Bill and the rest decide who the members are, and therefore the idea that you would look to the membership to fix this. I mean, how the membership has been constructed is the problem. It's not the solution.
And I mean, for a group that's got UN consultative status, do you know when the last time they didn't hear UN consulting was?
Never. So they claimed they submitted a video to one previous event during the pandemic. But
That's not the video that was going online where they were calling for, like, freedom of religion or freedom not to believe or something,
that's the
or
one.
demanding,
The right to be secular.
yeah,
They
which the UN has.
exactly. They also wrote to the Secretary General of the United Nations demanding a right that had existed for decades. Yeah, since that video, they've done absolutely nothing at the United Nations or at the Council of Europe. They also had participatory status at the Council of Europe, but they lost that explicitly because they did nothing. So the way these organizations work is you have to submit a quadrennial report once every 4 years. You have to submit this report describing this is what we did in the last 4 years. They did submit a report to the Council of Europe. Unfortunately, it said we haven't done anything for the last 4 years. At which point the Council of Europe said, "Well, why don't you fuck off then?"
Yeah.
So they fucked off.
Dear. Now, I'm aware it's gone past midnight where you are. We do
Sure.
try to keep these things to about an hour, so we might wrap it up. John,
Okay.
thanks for coming on. Is there anything? Where can people find you, and anything you want to plug?
Oh, that's embarrassing. So here I'm going to cry into the beer now, Chris. My Twitter handle is at J Hamill himself, and for a while, the only other famous Hamill in the world is Luke Skywalker. For a long while, his Twitter handle was Hamill himself, and one time I decided to change mine to J Hamill himself, and honestly, that lasted exactly 1 day until Luke Skywalker changed his to Mark Hamill. But I was too embarrassed to change mine back, so it's still J Hamill himself. But
You should have grabbed the Hamill himself one.
yeah,
If you
maybe you
want
should
to
have.
roll it.
Maybe you should have.
Yeah. We'll link for
Anyway,
that in
listen,
below too.
that was a shitload of fun. I really appreciate your time, man. I enjoyed that a lot.
Definitely, mate. We'll do it again. We'll have to have a more in-depth chat about whiskey, preferably while we're both having one. I think
For
next time.
sure, for
We'll
sure.
introduce you to some of the good Australian stuff.
Excellent. I will look forward to that.
Well, everyone, wherever you are watching or listening, whenever it is, have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening on this beautiful globe that we all occupy. Apologies to the flat earthers, but it's a globe. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, and thanks for watching and listening.
Take care, man. Have a great day.